I'm Thomas. I'm 70 years old, and somehow I'm still trying to heal from the pain my own flesh and blood caused me. As a retired structural engineer, I spent my entire life building solid foundations, never realizing my own son was secretly planning a devastating collapse. 5 months after my wife passed away, I took her broken smart glasses in for simple repair. The technician locked the doors of his shop, pulled me into a back room, and whispered, "Check the will immediately, or you're next." I froze, staring at a harrowing video he'd managed to recover from her glasses. Sitting in that dim room, my grief turned into a cold, calculated plan for justice. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up against family members who underestimated you, please leave a like and subscribe. Now, let me tell you how a simple errand uncovered a total nightmare. For 40 years in Chicago, I dedicated myself to building structures designed to stand the test of time. I knew all about stress fractures, load-bearing walls, and the invisible forces that cause a collapse. I truly believed my family was built on solid bedrock. I provided everything for my wife, Martha, and our son, Derek. I paid for his Ivy League education, funded an extravagant wedding for him and his wife, Rachel, and then stepped back to enjoy retirement, confident that everything I'd built was secure. 5 months ago, that foundation cracked. Martha passed away. The doctors called it a sudden, massive cardiac event. It happened on a Tuesday evening, while I was downtown at a charity board meeting. By the time I rushed back home, the paramedics were already shaking their heads. Derek and Rachel had been with her that night. They told me she just clutched her chest and collapsed, that it all happened too fast, and nobody could have saved her. I accepted it. Passing away is the one structural failure no engineer can calculate or prevent. But Martha had been struggling before she died. She was in the early stages of memory decline. She'd forget her keys, get lost on morning walks, and get so frustrated with her fading memory. To help her stay independent, I bought her a pair of custom smart glasses. They looked like regular designer frames, but they had a subtle camera built inside. It was designed to record her daily routes and sync to a private cloud, so she could trace her steps if she ever got lost. That night, the paramedics handed me her personal belongings in a plastic bag. Her wedding ring, her watch, and those glasses. The right lens was shattered from the impact of her fall. For months, I couldn't bring myself to look at them. The grief was too heavy, a suffocating weight that made me avoid anything reminding me she was gone. Yesterday morning, I finally found the courage to open that bag. I decided to get the glasses repaired to keep as a keepsake. I drove over to a small tech repair shop owned by Leo Mitchell. Leo was a brilliant kid, software wizard I'd known since he was a teenager. When his own father abandoned him, I helped pay for his college, and he always treated Martha and me like family. When I walked into his dusty repair shop, the chime above the door rang. Leo looked up from his workbench and smiled. I handed him the glasses, explaining that I just wanted the shattered lens replaced and the internal memory cleared so I could safely store them away. I expected him to take them, give me a claim ticket, and tell me to come back tomorrow. Instead, the moment Leo recognized the specific serial number on those frames, his entire demeanor shifted. The smile vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. He looked past me, staring intently out the front window, as if checking to see if I'd been followed. Without a word, Leo walked past me, flipped the sign on the door to closed, pulled down the heavy security shutters, and threw the deadbolt. A heavy, loud click echoed through the quiet shop. "What's going on, Leo?" I asked, my voice tight with confusion. He grabbed my arm with surprising force and pulled me toward the back room where he kept his secure servers. He shut the door behind us, plunging the small room into darkness, lit only by the soft glow of his computer monitors. Hands trembling uncontrollably, he held Martha's glasses. "Mr. Caldwell," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You need to check your wife's will right now, or you're next." I stared at him, my brain completely unable to process what he was saying. "Next?" I asked. "What does that mean? What are you talking about?" Leo didn't answer. He sat down at his terminal, plugged a specialized decryption cable into the hidden port on the glasses, and began typing furiously. He explained that a few weeks after Martha passed, he ran a routine diagnostic scan on his cloud servers, the ones hosting the backup data for her glasses. He noticed a massive anomaly. Right around the exact time of her death, there was a huge data wipe attempt. Someone had tried to remotely erase both the glasses and the cloud backups, but they were careless. They didn't know Leo had built a shadow directory directly into the hardware for emergency recovery. My heart stopped as he hit enter. A progress bar flickered on the screen, slowly piecing together fragments of corrupted data. "I managed to rebuild the original video file from the internal cache," Leo said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know what to do. I was terrified to call you." I didn't know who to trust. Just watch. The screen flickered to life. It was a first-person view, recorded directly from the camera resting on Martha's nose. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the exact date and time of her death. The video was shaky, but the resolution was clear. I was looking at the world through my late wife's eyes. She was in our kitchen. I saw her frail, trembling hands reaching toward the marble countertop. I heard her breathing, heavy and gasping, desperately trying to pull air into her lungs. It was the sound of someone going through a severe medical emergency. As Martha collapsed onto the hardwood floor, the camera angle jerked violently downward. The impact shattered the lens, leaving a jagged web of cracks across the left side of the screen. Through that fractured view, 2 pairs of shoes walked into the frame. A pair of expensive, polished Italian leather loafers, and a pair of designer high heels. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. Standing directly over my helpless wife were my son, Derek, and his wife, Rachel. They weren't panicking. They didn't reach for their phones to call for help. They didn't kneel down to assist her. They just stood there, looking down at her with an absolute chilling calm. Martha let out a desperate gasp. Her hand weakly reached up toward the counter above. Her voice was faint, breaking my heart into pieces. "Medicine," she gasped out. "My pills." Rachel stepped forward. Her perfectly manicured hand reached out and picked up the small orange prescription bottle containing Martha's emergency heart medication from the counter. I watched, completely paralyzed by a sickening wave of horror, as Rachel unscrewed the cap, looked down at my struggling wife, and turned right around, placing the medicine completely out of her reach. Derek knelt down. His face filled the camera's entire field of view. My own son, the boy I had raised and protected my whole life, was staring into his mother's eyes with a cold, hollow expression. He leaned in close, his lips parting as if he was about to speak. But before he could utter a single word, the video glitched violently. The image dissolved into a mess of digital noise, and the screen went completely black. I stood in that dark room, my lungs burning because I had stopped breathing. The silence in the repair shop was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the servers. "The video cuts off right there," Leo whispered into the silence. The impact of the fall damaged the internal drive, and whoever tried to erase the data corrupted the audio and the final few seconds of footage. The encryption is extremely deep. I've been running algorithms for weeks, but I need more time to recover the rest of the file and clean up the audio so we can hear what he actually said. My mind was a chaotic storm. The entire structural integrity of my reality had just been shattered. My wife hadn't simply passed away from a heart attack. She was allowed to perish by our own son and his wife. They had stood there, intentionally watching her suffer, withholding the medicine that could have saved her life, and now they were pretending to mourn her. Why? I thought, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. Why would they do this? "Check the will," Leo had said, "or you're next." Suddenly, the sharp ring of my phone shattered the tension in the room. Startled, I pulled it from my pocket. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim light. It was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen, the name of the man who had stood over my dying wife. My thumb hovered over the answer button. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the raging fury deep down inside me into a cold, locked box. I answered and put the phone to my ear. "Hey, Dad." Derek's voice came through the speaker. It was sickeningly sweet, dripping with that fake, practiced warmth he used with his clients. "Rachel and I are on our way to pick you up right now. We need to take you to the lawyer's office to sign those power of attorney forms. Dad, your memory has been slipping lately. You need us to step in and handle things for you. See you in 20 minutes. Before I could say a word, he hung up. I lowered the phone and stared at the dark screen. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with terrifying clarity. My son had taken his mother, and now he was coming for me. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The cool metal anchored my thoughts amidst the storm brewing in my chest. I looked at Leo. The young man was pale, his eyes filled with fear. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder to let him know I was in complete control. "Keep working on decrypting the rest of that audio file," I told him, my voice dangerously calm. "Back up everything onto a secure, offline drive, and don't answer the door for anyone except me. I'll handle my son." I walked out of the repair shop and stepped into the crisp, late autumn air. I had exactly 15 minutes before they arrived. As a structural engineer, I spent a 40-year career evaluating massive loads, calculating precisely how much relentless pressure a strong steel beam could take before it finally snapped. Now, I had to apply that same cold, unyielding math to my own mind. I couldn't show any crushing grief or blinding rage. I had to become the exact person they believed I already was, a weak, confused old man, consumed by loss, whose mind was slowly fading into the fog. I let my shoulders slump forward, completely altering my posture. I intentionally slowed my breathing, making it shallow and slightly labored. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting a blank, distant expression settle heavily over my features. Right on time, a sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The heavily tinted passenger window rolled down, revealing Derek in the driver's seat, gripping the hand-stitched leather steering wheel. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his hair meticulously styled, looking every bit the wildly successful investment banker he presented to the world. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, turning around to give me a bright, flawlessly practiced smile. That smile made my stomach turn with absolute disgust. "Oh, Dad, we were so worried about you," Rachel cooed softly, pushing open her heavy door and stepping onto the sidewalk to gently help me toward the vehicle. "Why are you walking around this busy neighborhood all by yourself? You know how easily you get disoriented these days." I let my hands tremble visibly as I reached out to take her offered arm. "I was just getting your mother's glasses fixed," I mumbled, deliberately slurring my words just enough to play the part. I thought maybe she'd want them back. Rachel and Derek flashed each other a quick, meaningful look, a glance that practically screamed, "The old man is deteriorating fast." She carefully guided me into the spacious back seat, as if I were a fragile antique that had already cracked under pressure. Derek pulled the massive SUV away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the busy afternoon traffic. He adjusted his rearview mirror just enough to make direct eye contact with me as he drove. He had always been a smooth talker, a master at pitching risky financial moves to wealthy clients who didn't know any better. Now, he was using those exact same manipulation tactics on his own father. "Dad, we really need to sit down and have a serious talk about the future," Derek began, his tone dripping with phony concern. "I went over the estate documents with the legal team this morning. Mom's final medical bills are extremely complicated. The huge invoices from the hospital just don't make sense, and the insurance company is giving us a hard time. It's quickly becoming a major administrative nightmare for everyone involved." I stared blankly out the tinted window, taking care to keep my expression completely hollow. "The bills," I quieted my voice, sounding distant and thoroughly confused. "I can just write a check, Derek. We have plenty of funds in the accounts. We don't need to worry about paying for medical care." "That's actually the root of the problem, Dad," Derek said smoothly, his fingers casually tapping the steering wheel. "You have $40 million sitting in various trust accounts, real estate holdings, and liquid assets. It's a massive, highly complex portfolio, but with Mom gone and unable to legally co-manage these affairs, the upcoming tax liabilities are going to be catastrophic. And frankly, Dad, Rachel, and I are deeply concerned about you living all alone in that huge house." "Concerned about me?" I asked, letting my frail voice carry a tragic, feeble confusion. Rachel turned completely around in her seat, resting a perfectly manicured hand affectionately on my knee. "Yes, Thomas," she said softly, her voice smooth as velvet over broken glass. "Ever since Martha passed, you just haven't been yourself. You keep forgetting things. You wander off without saying a word. The immense grief is taking a terrible toll on your health. We just want to protect you. There are so many ruthless scammers out there who target vulnerable seniors with large, unprotected estates. We couldn't live with ourselves if someone took advantage of you while you're so fragile." The suffocating hypocrisy of her sweet words almost made me drop my character right then and there. They were the ruthless scammers. They were the ultimate predators, right here in the car. But I simply nodded slowly, looking down at my visibly trembling hands. "What do you want me to do?" I asked softly, playing the tragic role of a broken victim to perfection. "It's simple, Dad," Derek chimed in, his voice suddenly light with a fake sense of relief. "We're heading straight to a lawyer's office to sign a comprehensive power of attorney. It just grants me the legal authority to seamlessly handle all the complex financial matters, manage the trusts, and deal with those relentless hospital billing departments. You won't have to worry about a single heavy task ever again. You can just rest peacefully at home and focus on your health. We'll carry the heavy burden for you." It was a brilliantly constructed, completely bulletproof lie. To any outsider, they looked like the ideal, devoted family stepping up out of love to care for a grieving patriarch. But I knew exactly what that legally binding document meant. It was a blank check. The second my signature hit that paper, Derek would have unlimited, unquestioned power to legally liquidate every single financial asset I owned. Rachel reached down to grab a sleek silver flask from the floorboard. She carefully unscrewed the top, letting a thick cloud of aromatic steam fill the luxury SUV's temperature-controlled cabin. "Here, Thomas," she whispered lovingly, leaning across the center console to hand me a small insulated travel mug. "Before we left today, I brewed a special batch of my homemade herbal tea just for you. It's the exact same soothing blend I used to make for Martha whenever she felt overwhelmed and anxious. It'll really help calm your nerves and clear away that nasty brain fog you've been fighting lately. Drink it while it's still warm." I carefully took the warm cup from her perfectly steady hand. My own fingers were shaking violently, and this time the physical tremors were entirely real. A reaction of pure, unadulterated revulsion. I stared down into the dark, earthy liquid swirling in the small metal cup. The strong scents of chamomile and fresh mint tried, and failed to mask something else lurking just beneath the warm surface. A subtle, metallic undertone that made my skin crawl. "You really should finish it, Dad," Derek urged firmly, his calculating eyes fixed on the busy road ahead. "Rachel spent all morning preparing it for you. It's incredible for your cognitive stability. You know how badly you need it right now." I slowly brought the thin rim of the cup to my dry lips, faking a slow, hesitant sip. I kept my mouth tightly sealed, not letting a single drop slip through. Just then, Derek aggressively jerked the wheel to execute a sharp turn through a congested downtown intersection, shouting a curse at a passing delivery truck. He was completely distracted by the heavy traffic. Seizing the fleeting moment, I gave my right wrist a sharp, intentional jerk. A large splash of hot tea spilled over the rim of the travel mug, landing directly onto the heavy-duty synthetic floor mat beneath my shoes. I immediately looked down at the dark, steaming puddle. Almost instantly, a faint chemical hiss echoed softly in the quiet footwell. The resilient synthetic rubber of the expensive mat began to severely discolor where the liquid settled, turning a sickening, pale yellow. The horrifying realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My brilliant, beautiful wife hadn't died from natural causes at all. Her sudden heart failure had been preceded by 5 long months of agonizing decay, severe nerve degradation, mysterious joint pain, and a crippling brain fog. Her physical symptoms matched mine over the last 5 months, with terrifying precision. Symptoms they had repeatedly dismissed as old age and grief. I hadn't been losing my mind. I hadn't been fading away from a broken heart. I was actively being poisoned. The rest of the drive passed in a suffocating blur. I kept my breathing shallow, my mind running cold calculations to keep my hands from reaching across the console. They were systematically taking my life, step by deliberate step, just like they did with Martha. Every bitter cup of tea, every comforting touch on my shoulder, all of it was just part of a calculated plan to put me in the ground. Derek eventually pulled the heavy SUV into a run-down commercial strip at the edge of the financial district. I looked up at a weathered brick building, wedged between a closed dry cleaner and a cheap liquor store. Faded gold lettering on the glass door read, "Maxwell and Associates Legal Counsel." This wasn't the pristine high-rise where my trusted estate attorney, Gregory Barnes, had his practice. Gregory had managed my family's affairs for 30 years. He was a ruthless professional who scrutinized every single line of a contract. Derek knew Gregory would never allow a power of attorney transfer without rigorous questioning. So, my son bypassed the family lawyer entirely and found a bottom feeder willing to cut corners for a quick payday. I stumbled slightly as I got out of the car, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Rachel was at my side in an instant, gripping my elbow with a firm hold. We stepped into a cramped reception area that smelled of stale coffee. A man in an ill-fitting gray suit waited behind a cluttered desk, offering a slick, greasy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," the attorney said, extending a sweaty hand. "I'm Richard Maxwell. Derek has told me so much about you. Today, we just need to sign a few routine documents to relieve you of your heavy administrative burdens." I nodded slowly, offering a trembling hand to shake his. They led me into a tiny conference room. Derek pulled out a chair, and as I sat down, he placed his hands heavily on my shoulders. Maxwell slid a thick stack of bound papers across the scratched wooden table. "This is a durable power of attorney," Maxwell explained, tapping the signature line with a cheap plastic pen. "It grants your son immediate legal authority to consolidate your bank accounts, liquidate investment portfolios, and manage all ongoing medical or tax obligations. Given your declining health, this ensures your vast estate is fully protected." I stared down at the dense wall of legal text. It was a death warrant. The moment my signature hit that page, Derek could digitally transfer my $40 million life savings into whatever offshore accounts he wanted. He could drain my legacy completely, leaving me penniless long before the poison finished its job. I reached out a trembling hand, letting my fingers hover over the pen. Derek leaned in close, his breathing shallow with suppressed anticipation. "Just sign right at the bottom, Dad," he urged softly, "right next to that blue tab." I picked up the pen. The tip touched the paper. Then I let out a sudden, violent cough. I doubled over in the chair, clutching my chest and coughing uncontrollably into my forearm. I let the pen slip from my fingers, watching it clatter onto the floor. Rachel quickly handed me a tissue, her face a mask of counterfeit concern. I gasped heavily, playing the role of an exhausted, frail old man to perfection. "I'm so sorry," I whispered weakly, rubbing my chest. "My chest feels so tight today." I looked down at the documents, squinting as if the text were a blur. "Derek, I can't read a word of this. I must have left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter at home." Maxwell frowned, casting a nervous glance at my son. "You don't strictly need to read all the fine print, Mr. Caldwell. I've summarized the key points for you. It's entirely standard language." I shook my head stubbornly, clumsily pushing the heavy stack of papers away. "No," I mumbled, slurring my words. "Martha always told me never to sign anything I couldn't see clearly with my own eyes. I'll take these home. I'll review them over the long weekend when my head is clearer. We can come back next week." A heavy silence descended on the room, thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked up, letting my blank gaze drift over to my son. Derek was staring directly at me, and for one terrifying fraction of a second, his carefully crafted mask completely slipped. The veins in his neck bulged, and his jaw clenched so hard in pure, unadulterated fury that I could hear his teeth grinding. He looked at me like a trapped animal whose payday was slipping away. He looked like he wanted to force my hand onto the page himself. "Dad," Derek said, his voice tight and dangerously low, "we really need to wrap this up today. The tax deadlines are approaching." Before he could explode, Rachel smoothly stepped in front of him, placing a calming hand firmly against his chest. She flashed me a sickening smile devoid of any warmth. "Of course, Thomas." Rachel coaxed gently, gathering the documents and sliding them neatly into a manila folder. "You should absolutely take your time. There's no rush at all. We want you to feel completely comfortable with everything. Derek is just a bit stressed about the upcoming hospital bills. That's all." Derek swallowed his visible rage, forcing a stiff, awkward nod. "Right. Of course. Sorry, Dad. Take your time over the weekend. We'll go over it together on Monday." They drove me back to my empty house in almost complete silence. The tension radiating from the front seats was palpable. I held the manila folder tightly against my chest, a physical shield against their desperate greed. Every mile made my reality crystal clear. The clock was ticking. They needed the money immediately, and my refusal to sign had just accelerated their timeline. When we finally pulled into my long, winding driveway, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to me with an unnervingly sweet smile. "Thomas, I'm actually going to stay in the guest room tonight," she announced smoothly. "You were coughing so hard in that office, and you seem so fragile today. I want to make sure you have a warm, nutritious dinner and get proper care tonight. I'd never forgive myself if you fell or had a medical emergency while you were all alone. My stomach churned. She wasn't staying to care for me. She was staying to watch me. She was staying to make sure I swallowed my daily dose of whatever slow-acting mixture she was feeding me. "You're so thoughtful, Rachel," I whispered weakly, letting her help me out of the SUV. Later that evening, after a quiet, heavily monitored dinner, I retired to my private study. I sat in my large leather armchair, staring blankly at the dark mahogany desk. Rachel knocked softly and stepped inside, carrying a small silver tray. On it sat a steaming cup of her special herbal tea and a single, unmarked white pill. "Derek spoke with your doctor this afternoon, Thomas," she lied effortlessly, handing me the pill. "He prescribed a new high-potency supplement to help strengthen your heart and clear up that brain fog. You need to swallow it now and finish every drop of your tea so you can get a long, deep sleep." I looked at the pill resting in my palm, smooth, unmarked, and completely unidentifiable, a quiet, untraceable weapon. I gave her a weak, grateful nod and raised my hand to my mouth. I tilted my head back as if swallowing the pill, but skillfully hid it deep beneath my tongue. I grabbed a glass of water from the desk, taking a large, believable gulp. "There," I said, letting out a tired, raspy sigh. "All gone." Rachel smiled, her eyes locked onto the steaming cup of tea. "Finish the tea too," she prompted gently. "I'll be right outside in the hallway if you need anything at all." She turned and slowly walked out of the study, leaving the heavy wooden door cracked open just a sliver so she could listen in. The second her footsteps faded down the hall, I moved with silent, precise efficiency. I spat the bitter, dissolving pill into a thick tissue, shoving it deep into my pocket. I grabbed the steaming cup of poisoned tea and moved silently across the thick rug toward the door. Right outside the study, sitting elegantly in the long, dimly lit hallway, was a large decorative fern. "You know how she is, Dad." I peeked carefully through the crack in the door, making sure Rachel had disappeared in order to the far side of the kitchen. With a steady hand, I poured the hot tea directly into the rich soil of the ceramic planter. The dark liquid sank out of sight almost instantly. I wiped the rim of the cup clean, walked back to my desk, and sat in total silence, ready for what came next. When the pale morning light filtered through the heavy bedroom curtains, I opened my eyes. For the first time in 5 months, the world didn't spin into a nauseating blur the moment my head lifted from the pillow. I lay still on the mattress, taking a slow, deep breath, mentally checking every joint and muscle in my body. The constant, dull ache in my knees, the heavy stiffness in my shoulders, and the suffocating fog that usually blanketed my thoughts had lifted significantly. It wasn't a miraculous full recovery, but the sudden absence of that oppressive weight was undeniable. Simply skipping a single dose of Rachel's special tea had given my body a moment of terrifying clarity. I sat up slowly on the edge of the bed, my feet planted firmly on the hardwood floor. My legs didn't shake. When I held my hands out in front of me, they were completely steady. The reality of my situation washed over me again, cold and sharp. Everything I had been feeling, the weakness, the confusion, the sudden inability to remember simple daily tasks, had been a carefully engineered illusion. They were systematically dismantling my body, microgram by microgram, making sure my eventual collapse looked like the natural decline of a heartbroken old man. They had done the exact same thing to Martha. They watched her fade away, offering fake smiles and poisoned tea, right until her heart finally gave out. I stood up, my spine straight, fueled by a sharp sense of purpose. I got dressed quietly, choosing simple clothes to maintain the illusion of a fragile, defeated man. I opened the bedroom door and walked down the quiet hallway toward the main living area. The house was dead silent, save for the faint, muffled hum of conversation floating up from the kitchen downstairs. As I walked down the hall, I paused outside my private study. My eyes fell on the large decorative fern in the corner. Just last night, it had been a vibrant plant with lush green fronds reaching toward the ceiling. Now it stood as a horrifying monument to my son's absolute betrayal. The plant was completely dead. The lush leaves had shriveled into dry, brittle husks. The stems were blackened and curled inward, as if scorched by an invisible chemical fire. At the base of the thick ceramic pot, right where I had poured the steaming tea, the rich black soil was stained a sickening, unnatural pale yellow. The sheer toxicity required to destroy a healthy plant in a matter of hours made my blood run cold. If I had swallowed that pill and finished that tea last night, I wouldn't have woken up this morning. I would have been just another tragic case of sudden heart failure, Another convenient tragedy for Derek and Rachel to mourn at an expensive, catered funeral. Staring at those blackened leaves, the love I once held for my son turned completely to ash. The boy I taught to ride a bike, the son I proudly watched graduate, he was gone. In his place stood a cold, greedy predator, and I was going to treat him like one. I continued down the wide staircase, gripping the wooden banister tightly and deliberately slowing my pace to mimic a heavy, exhausted shuffle. I stepped into the sunlit kitchen. Derek was sitting at the marble island, typing aggressively on his sleek laptop. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his expensive leather briefcase resting on the counter beside him. Rachel stood by the stove, cheerfully stirring a pot of oatmeal, humming a soft, pleasant tune as if she hadn't tried to quietly end my life 12 hours earlier. "Good morning, Thomas," Rachel chirped, turning around with a bright, practiced smile. "How did you sleep?" "I was listening for you, but it was so quiet. You must have been completely exhausted." I gave her a weak, hollow nod. "I slept soundly, Rachel," I mumbled, keeping my voice raspy and low. "That herbal tea worked wonders. I don't think I moved a muscle all night." Rachel and Derek exchanged a look of pure satisfaction. Derek looked up from his bright screen, giving me a stiff, completely unsympathetic smile. "Glad to hear that, Dad. We really need you to rest up and get your strength back. We still have to head back to the lawyer's office on Monday to wrap those documents up. The administrative delays are getting to be a real pain." Before I could manufacture a pitiful, submissive response, Derek's phone buzzed violently on the marble countertop. He glanced down at the glowing screen, and his confident, arrogant posture vanished instantly. His face went pale, and pure, unfiltered panic flickered wildly in his eyes. He snatched the phone off the counter as if it were burning his skin. "I have to take this right now," Derek stammered, his voice tight and completely unnatural. He shoved his chair back and almost sprinted toward the glass patio doors leading out to the backyard. Rachel watched him, then turned her attention back to the bubbling oatmeal on the hot stove. He stepped outside, sliding the heavy glass door shut tightly behind him. Pressing the phone to his ear, he began pacing anxiously across the wooden deck. Rachel frowned, clearly annoyed by his sudden chaotic exit, before turning back to the stove. "Oh, for goodness sake, we're completely out of almond milk. You like almond milk in yours, right, Thomas?" She let out an exaggerated sigh, playing up her frustration. "I'll have to run down to the basement pantry and grab a fresh carton. I'll be right back. Don't touch the hot stove." She wiped her hands on a towel and hurried toward the basement stairs. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me completely alone in the spacious kitchen. I looked out through the glass doors. Derek was pacing frantically along the edge of the swimming pool, his free hand running nervously through his meticulously styled hair. His face was contorted in a desperate, panicked conversation. He was completely distracted, entirely consumed by whatever disaster was unfolding on the other end of the line. I turned my eyes back to the kitchen counter. Derek's expensive leather briefcase, secured with a combination lock, was sitting right there, completely unattended. My engineering background required me to understand the intricate mechanical flaws of countless physical security systems. A standard 3-digit combination lock on a consumer-grade leather briefcase was child's play. It was a simple mechanical device that relied on tiny internal tension pins. Moving quickly and silently, I instantly shed the facade of a fragile old man. I stepped up to the counter, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a small, sturdy metal paperclip I always carried with me. I quickly straightened the thick wire, fashioning a rigid makeshift tension tool. I slid the metal tip directly into the tiny gap beside the first numbered dial, applying steady, even pressure against the internal latch. I slowly rotated the dial with my thumb, feeling for the microscopic, mechanical click that indicated the internal pin had aligned with the opening groove. Click. I moved to the second dial and repeated the delicate, precise process. Click. The third dial rotated smoothly, settling into place with a final, satisfying snap. I pressed down on the brass release button, and the heavy leather flap of the briefcase popped open. I didn't waste a single second. Bypassing the glossy marketing brochures, thick financial portfolios, and expensive pens, I reached straight into the rear compartment. My fingers made contact with a thick stack of high-quality legal documents bound in a distinctive blue cover. I pulled it out and quickly scanned the bold, capitalized text printed across the cover page. It was a heavily modified, notarized copy of the Martha Caldwell Irrevocable Trust Agreement. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the master document, the absolute core of my entire $40 million estate. My real attorney, Gregory Barnes, kept the original safely stored in his firm's vault. Clearly, Derek had hired that shady new lawyer downtown to draft a series of aggressive, highly illegal trust amendments designed to bypass the legal protections I had put in place decades ago. I quickly flipped through the dense, heavy pages, scanning the complex legal terminology with the trained, meticulous eye of a man who had spent 40 years reading complex structural blueprints. I skipped past the standard asset distribution clauses and real estate holdings, searching specifically for the newly added amendments. I found it buried near the very back of the massive document. A brand new, heavily flagged section that had absolutely no business being there. It was explicitly labeled Section 4B, Spousal Survival Contingency Clause. I slid my finger down the page, reading the freshly printed text. My blood turned to solid ice in my veins. The carefully constructed legal phrasing was undeniably clear, brutally designed to strip away every protective barrier surrounding my estate. I leaned in closer, my eyes locking onto the devastating final sentence of Section 4B. I stared down at the crisp white paper, my eyes tracking the dark black ink. The dense legal jargon masked a brutal and crystal clear survivorship condition twisted to serve sheer greed. Our trust originally stipulated that I retain control of the $40 million estate, with the remainder going to a medical charity upon my passing. But Derek had completely gutted our legacy. Section 4B stated that if I passed away within 6 months of Martha's death, the charitable bequest would be completely voided. The entire $40 million estate would transfer 100% directly to Derek. He knew a power of attorney could be legally challenged. What he wanted was permanent, unquestionable legal ownership. He needed me completely gone. I pressed my hands firmly against the cold granite edge of the kitchen island. I raised my eyes past the modern stainless steel appliances, looking toward the large digital calendar displayed on the wall oven panel. My brain, trained for decades to calculate exact structural loads instantly, ran the horrifying math of my impending death. Martha had been gone for 5.5 months. The 6-month mark of her death was exactly 14 days away. A bone-chilling clarity washed over me, wiping out any lingering traces of parental denial. This wasn't a vague, open-ended plot to slowly drain my accounts. It was a calculated execution with a precise schedule. Derek and Rachel were operating on an extremely tight, unforgiving timeline. Every bitter cup of tea, every unmarked vitamin pill they shoved into my hand had been perfectly dosed to ensure my body suffered a massive, catastrophic failure before that 2-week deadline expired. They needed my heart to stop beating before mid-April. If I survived past that 6-month mark, the trust's original charitable provisions would lock in permanently, cutting off the massive $40 million windfall Derek desperately needed to cover his illicit offshore debts. They were watching the clock, waiting for the heavy metal toxin to build up in my bloodstream, eagerly anticipating the moment I finally collapsed onto the hardwood floor, just like his mother did. I took a slow, deep breath, locking my raging fury behind an impenetrable wall of mental discipline. I had 14 days to turn their lethal trap back on them. 14 days to systematically dismantle my son's entire life. Suddenly, the heavy glass door on the patio rattled violently against its metal track. Heavy footsteps thundered aggressively across the wooden deck. Derek was coming back. His phone call had ended abruptly, and his shadow was moving quickly toward the kitchen entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had less than 2 seconds to conceal the evidence. I quickly shoved the heavy legal document back into the hidden rear compartment of the leather briefcase. I folded the marketing brochures back over it, perfectly recreating the messy, disorganized layout Derek had left. With fast, precise movements, I pressed the heavy leather flap down. The brass lock snapped shut with a crisp click just as the glass door was thrown open. Derek strode into the kitchen, his face flushed and his expensive tie pulled loose at the collar. He practically slammed his phone onto the dining table, radiating a highly volatile, anxious energy. His sharp eyes immediately snapped toward the kitchen island. He stopped dead in his tracks. I was standing far too close to his briefcase, My hand was hovering just inches above the polished brass lock. The tension in the room spiked instantly, the air growing thick and suffocating. Derek's posture shifted, his shoulders tightening as he took a slow, calculated step toward me. The mask of a loving, concerned son completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a predator protecting a critical secret. "What are you doing?" Derek demanded, his voice flat, razor-sharp, and extremely dangerous. "Why are you hovering around my bag?" I didn't flinch, nor did I step back. Relying on 40 years of experience confronting aggressive contractors, I let my shoulders slump instantly, allowing a soft, vacant expression to quickly wash over my face. I raised my hand to my forehead, rubbing my temples as if caught in a deep, disorienting fog. "I was just looking for the sugar bowl, Derek," I mumbled, deliberately slurring my speech to sound feeble and thoroughly lost. "I wanted to put some sugar in my tea. Your wife made me a lovely cup of tea, but it's just so bitter today. I can't seem to remember where Martha kept the sugar bowl anymore. Everything in this kitchen seems to be hiding from me." Derek locked his sharp gaze onto me, studying every line on my face, searching for any subtle flaw in my performance. He looked down at the locked briefcase, then back up at my trembling hands. I offered him a pathetic, helpless smile, blinking slowly as if the bright kitchen lights hurt my tired eyes. Slowly, the aggressive tension drained from his stiff posture. He bought the lie. He genuinely believed he was looking at a broken, rapidly declining old man whose brain was rotting away from grief and age. "The sugar is in the pantry, Dad," Derek said, his voice reverting to that sickeningly sweet, condescending tone. "Right where it's always been. Why don't you go sit down in the living room? You look exhausted. I'll have Rachel bring it out to you." I gave a weak nod and shuffled across the polished tile floor, moving toward the hallway with an agonizingly exaggerated slowness. I kept my head down, playing the role of the broken patriarch to absolute perfection. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, the basement door swung open. Rachel returned to the room, holding a fresh carton of almond milk. She looked at Derek, sensing the heavy tension lingering in the air. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I paused just outside the archway, completely out of their sight, but close enough to hear their hushed, secretive voices. "He was hovering around the island looking for sugar," Derek muttered, letting out a heavy, frustrated sigh. "His mind is completely gone, Rachel. He doesn't even know where he is half the time. But we're running out of time. That call from my associate was bad. They're demanding their money by the end of the month, or they're coming after me. We can't afford to wait for his heart to give out on its own." I heard the slight rustle of fabric as Rachel stepped closer to her husband. "I know," she whispered, her voice devoid of any human empathy. "The tea is working, but he's been stubbornly resilient. I'll take care of it. When I make him dinner tonight, we need to double the dose completely. We'll ramp up his daily intake, and this whole problem will be over before the weekend." I held my breath in the dark hallway, pressing my back flat against the cold plaster wall. Derek and Rachel continued their hushed, venomous conversation in the kitchen, entirely unaware that their timeline had just been completely exposed. I waited until the sound of Derek's leather shoes moved toward the front door, followed closely by the clicking of Rachel's heels. I heard the rustle of jackets being grabbed, and then the heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt engaged automatically, locking me inside. In the deafening silence of the house I had built with my own hands, I was finally alone. I stepped out of the deep shadows and walked straight into my private study. Pulling the crumpled tissue from my pocket, I saw the dissolved white pill had dried into a thick, chalky residue. Next, I walked over to the ruined potted fern. Reaching into the blackened fronds, I snapped off a few dead stems and scooped up a handful of the yellowed soil. I placed both the toxic plant samples and the tissue into a sealable plastic bag. My hands were completely steady now. The trembling weakness was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. I was no longer a grieving widower. I was an engineer investigating a catastrophic failure. Grabbing my keys, I walked out the door. I drove my unassuming sedan straight past the towering downtown hospitals. I needed absolute discretion. As a structural engineer, I had spent a lifetime dissecting catastrophic material failures, isolating the exact point where a solid beam yielded to pressure. Now, I was applying that exact same clinical methodology to my own bloodline. I drove to an unmarked, sleek glass building located in an affluent northern suburb, a high-end private analytical laboratory specializing in independent chemical testing for corporate litigation. Walking into the sterile lobby, I approached the front desk. I offered no name and provided no personal medical history. Sliding the sealed bag across the white counter, I requested an immediate toxicology screen. The receptionist blinked, mentioning that standard processing time was 3 to 5 business days. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a number that was 4 times their standard rush fee, telling her I needed a precise molecular-level breakdown of every compound present in the pill residue and the soil before sunset. Money erased the bureaucratic friction. The receptionist summoned a senior chemist, who nodded grimly and took the samples. I spent 3 excruciating hours in the quiet waiting room, calculating the exact trajectory of my son's elaborate scam in my head. Finally, the heavy glass door leading to the secure lab clicked open. A senior analytical chemist, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes, wearing a crisp white lab coat, silently gestured for me to follow him into his office. He closed the heavy door firmly behind us, ensuring the electronic lock engaged with a sharp click. Sitting heavily behind his modern desk, he slid a thick, freshly printed diagnostic report across the smooth glass surface. The detailed document was filled with complex chemical spectrograms and severe warning flags indicating extreme toxicity. "You requested a full molecular breakdown," the chemist began, his voice tight with professional concern. "The white residue on the tissue is a concentrated, unregulated synthetic sedative. It's a potent central nervous system depressant designed to cause extreme drowsiness, severe cognitive confusion, and profound physical weakness. It perfectly mimics the natural symptoms of advanced dementia or rapid neurological decline in elderly patients." I nodded slowly, my jaw clenched tight. "And the soil sample?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The chemist took a deep breath, looking at me with a mix of deep sympathy and absolute horror. "The soil is completely saturated with a heavy metal compound called thallium," he stated grimly. "It is tasteless, completely odorless, and incredibly lethal even in microscopic doses. Historically, it's known as the poisoner's poison because it's almost impossible to detect in standard blood panels without a specific, highly targeted screen. It aggressively attacks the central nervous system and the cardiovascular muscles. Over time, slow thallium accumulation causes severe joint pain, profound brain fog, and ultimately triggers a sudden, catastrophic cardiac arrest. It leaves virtually no visible trace in a standard hospital autopsy. The victim simply appears to have suffered a fatal heart attack." The quiet, sterile walls of the lab felt like they were closing in as the horrifying truth burned into my bones. The puzzle was complete. Every agonizing symptom I had experienced over the last 5 months, the debilitating fatigue, the terrifying memory lapses, the days I could barely walk up the stairs, had all been artificially induced. Derek and Rachel had been feeding me a carefully calculated daily cocktail of sedatives to mask a lethal, slow-acting heavy metal that was actively destroying my cardiovascular system. The darkest, most devastating realization of my life hit me. Martha, my beautiful, vibrant, loving wife, hadn't died from a sudden, unavoidable medical tragedy either. She had experienced the exact same severe joint pain. She had suffered through the exact same terrifying brain fog. They had systematically poisoned her, watching her slowly deteriorate, serving her toxic herbal tea with bright, loving smiles until her heart finally gave out under the immense strain. They had ended the life of the woman I loved more than my own, simply to trigger the financial contingency clauses of a massive trust. And now, operating under a strict 2-week deadline, they were preparing to double my dose to finish the job and claim their bloody inheritance. The chemist leaned forward, breaking the heavy silence. "Sir," he said urgently, "this is a severe case of criminal poisoning. I am legally obligated to advise you to contact the police immediately. We need to hand this report directly over to law enforcement." I looked down at the chemical charts, a cold, dark void opening deep within my soul. If I called the local police right now, Derek and Rachel would simply be arrested at their beautiful home. They would immediately hire expensive defense attorneys, drag out the painful process through endless legal appeals, and sit comfortably in a safe cell, eating 3 meals a day. That was nowhere near enough. For the monsters who had tortured and murdered my wife, An arrest was far too clean, far too merciful. I looked up at the visibly shaken chemist, my eyes completely devoid of any remaining human warmth or parental affection. "No," I whispered to the man, folding the thick toxicology report and sliding it securely into my jacket pocket. "I don't need the police today. I don't want my son to just go quietly to prison. I am going to systematically dismantle his entire world and ruin them both forever." I left the private lab and stepped into the fading afternoon light, carrying that toxicology report like a loaded weapon. My grief was completely burned away, leaving behind only a cold, structural resolve. Driving my sedan to a secure public payphone outside a rundown strip mall on the desolate outskirts of the city, I ensured my communications had zero digital trace. I dialed a private, unlisted number I had known by heart for 30 years. It rang twice before a gruff, familiar voice answered the line with deep suspicion. Gregory Barnes wasn't just my estate lawyer. He was a ruthless legal shark who had built his formidable reputation by destroying anyone who dared attempt to defraud his wealthy clients. I told him I needed an immediate, off-the-books meeting far away from his downtown office building. I told him my own son was actively trying to end my life. Gregory didn't ask a single clarifying question. He simply gave me the exact address of a highly discreet private warehouse in the Riverfront Industrial District, and told me to drive there immediately. I arrived at the sprawling corrugated metal building as a heavy late autumn rain began to fall. Gregory was waiting for me inside a stark, brightly lit office built of reinforced glass and steel. He was wearing a tailored black suit, his sharp eyes scanning my disheveled appearance as I walked through the door. I wasted no time on pleasantries or emotional outbursts. Sitting at the cold steel table, I placed the toxicology report directly in front of him. Next to it, I placed high-resolution photos I had taken earlier of the fraudulent power of attorney documents Derek had tried to force on me at that shady law firm. Gregory put on his reading glasses and opened the file. I watched his jaw tighten as he read the chemical breakdown, his eyes scanning the terrifying paragraphs detailing the potent sedatives and lethal concentrations of thallium. He meticulously examined the photos of the forged trust amendments, taking special note of the fraudulent contingency clause designed to bypass the charitable donation and grant Derek total access to the estate. Gregory closed the file with a sharp snap. His face was a mask of cold, professional fury. He had managed Martha's legal affairs for 30 years and had always considered us close personal friends. The sudden realization that my son had systematically poisoned her for financial gain ignited a terrifying, silent rage within the veteran attorney. "We absolutely cannot take this to the police," Gregory stated, his voice flat. "If we hand this over to the authorities now, your son will immediately hire an aggressive defense team. They'll claim you suffer from severe dementia, just as they've been documenting for the last 5 months. They'll argue the lab results are purely circumstantial, or that you somehow accidentally poisoned yourself due to your mental decline. Derek could easily drag this out in the criminal court system for a decade while sitting comfortably on bail." I nodded slowly, in complete agreement with his ruthless assessment. I told Gregory I wanted to thoroughly disassemble Derek, strip him of his false prestige, his stolen wealth, and his freedom, leaving him with absolutely nothing. Gregory pulled a secure, encrypted laptop from his leather briefcase and began typing with rapid precision. He told me he was bringing his elite forensic accounting team online immediately. If Derek was taking such a massive, fatal risk to access $40 million within a strict 2-week window, there had to be a massive hole in his personal finances that urgently needed to be found. For the next 4 excruciating hours, I sat in that sterile warehouse office, listening to the relentless click of Gregory's keyboard and his hushed, intense phone calls with his elite financial investigators. Tonight, Gregory's team had unrestricted backdoor access to global banking networks, hidden offshore registries, and highly encrypted financial databases. They were digital hunters, relentlessly tracking the invisible, intricate webs of capital across international borders. I watched the cold rain beat violently against the high warehouse windows, my focus completely locked on the impending collapse of the man I used to proudly call my son. Derek had spent years cultivating the flawless image of a wildly successful, invincible investment banker. He wore expensive, tailored suits, drove sleek luxury imports, and never hesitated to boast about his massive, unbeatable stock portfolio. But as the clock slowly ticked past midnight, Gregory finally pushed his glowing laptop away from the center of the table. He took off his reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and let out a deep, heavy sigh. The truth is far worse than just shocking. It's pathetic. Your son is a total, absolute fraud, Thomas, Gregory said quietly, turning the laptop screen so I could clearly see the cascading columns of red numbers. That image of a wildly successful banker is nothing more than a hollow, desperate charade to deceive everyone around him. He doesn't have a thriving stock portfolio. He doesn't even legally own the luxury estate where he lives with Rachel. That house is leveraged to the absolute breaking point, and he secretly took out 4 separate, highly illegal secondary loans against it using completely forged corporate revenue statements. I stared in silence at the catastrophic financial ruin displayed on the screen. Gregory clicked on a specific folder on the digital dashboard, opening a complex series of encrypted transaction logs that detailed a 3-year spree of massive financial abuse. Derek is a deeply desperate, completely unhinged gambler, Gregory continued, his tone dripping with unfiltered disgust. Over the past 3 years, he completely liquidated all his legitimate savings to throw money into volatile cryptocurrency speculation and illegal offshore sports betting syndicates. When the crypto market crashed and his aggressive bets failed, he began borrowing heavily at absurd interest rates, desperately trying to cover his skyrocketing losses. According to the forensic audit, Derek is currently sinking under $15 million in unsecured, completely illegal gambling debt. I absorbed the staggering number in silence. 15 million. Gregory leaned across the table, his expression growing dark and stern. It gets much worse, Thomas, the veteran attorney warned, pulling up a highly confidential file his team had intercepted from a secure server. The vast sums Derek borrowed came directly from an extremely violent underground crime syndicate. Intercepted communications confirm they are actively threatening to end his life. He isn't just trying to get an early inheritance. He is murdering his own parents purely to steal $40 million to save his own skin. The revelation hung like a physical weight in the cold warehouse air. Owing $15 million to people who don't send polite collection notices or negotiate payment plans meant Derek was no longer just a greedy, privileged son. He was a cornered animal, drowning in a violent criminal underworld, willing to systematically destroy his own flesh and blood to buy his survival. I looked across the table at Gregory. The attorney's face was carved from solid granite. He slowly closed the confidential files on his encrypted laptop, folded his hands, and waited for my command in absolute silence. I told him we weren't going to wait for Derek to attempt another sloppy legal maneuver or draft another forged document. We were going to hand my son the exact thing he was desperately hunting for, except we were going to line it with invisible federal razor wire. A sharp, dangerous smile touched Gregory's lips. He reopened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. Over the next 3 excruciating hours, we constructed a brilliant, devastating financial trap. Gregory called it a digital honeypot. Using his highest-level banking contacts, he cleanly carved out exactly $5 million from my primary estate holdings and transferred it into a newly created, strictly isolated sub-account. This specific account was fitted with sophisticated digital tripwires. Then, we drafted a very narrow, highly specific, partial power of attorney. It was nothing like the sweeping blank check document Derek had tried to force on me at that shady law firm. This new document granted my son temporary legal authority exclusively to manage, trade, and execute transactions within this single $5 million account. I asked Gregory how this specific strategy would destroy him. Gregory explained the mechanics with cold, clinical precision. By granting Derek access to this specific account under the strict guise of legitimate domestic investment management, we were actively inviting him to cross a massive, insurmountable legal line. The moment Derek attempts to wire these funds to an unverified offshore entity to pay off his illicit debts, he will commit textbook, undeniable federal wire fraud. Furthermore, because the account is digitally flagged by my forensic team, I am privately alerting my highest-level contacts at the FBI. The second an international transfer is initiated, the cyber division will actively track the routing address. It's a trap that carries mandatory, long-term federal prison time, completely bypassing local police jurisdiction or delayed bail hearings. As the bleak morning light began to break, painting the city skyline in bruised purples and dark grays, I left the industrial warehouse. I drove back to my quiet mansion, preparing mentally and physically for the performance of my life. When I walked through the front door, Rachel was already awake in the kitchen, cheerfully brewing another pot of her deadly, aromatic chamomile tea. How she is, Daddy, immediately let my shoulders slump forward, dragging my feet across the polished hardwood, deliberately making my breath sound raspy and labored in the quiet foyer. She rushed over, wearing a flawless mask of suffocating concern, gently scolding me for leaving the house so early in such a fragile state. I told her I had simply gone to the local pharmacy to pick up the new vitamin supplements she requested, playing the confused, compliant victim to perfection. I gratefully took the steaming mug she offered, walked slowly into my private study, poured the toxic liquid directly into the trash, and masked the splash with a loud, violent coughing fit. Later that afternoon, I called Derek. I told him my chest felt unusually tight, that my memory was slipping faster than ever, and that I needed him at the house immediately to put our affairs in order. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, his expensive luxury SUV screeching into the long driveway. He practically ran into the house, his eyes darting around the hallway with an almost uncontainable panicked desperation. He urgently needed those funds. The syndicate's deadline was likely breathing down his neck. I sat in the large leather armchair in the center of the study, wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, intentionally trembling as I weakly gestured for him to sit across from my mahogany desk. "Derek," I whispered, letting my voice crack with fabricated, pitiful grief. "I'm just so tired. I can't handle these complex administrative battles anymore. You were completely right yesterday. I'm losing my grip on things, and I'm terrified of ruining the financial legacy your mother and I built." Derek leaned forward aggressively, his hands gripping his knees, struggling to mask his predatory eagerness behind a sickening display of filial sympathy. "Everything is going to be okay, Dad," he whispered smoothly, his voice dripping with fake reassurance. "I'm right here. I'll handle all the heavy lifting from now on. You just need to sign the documents we looked at yesterday, and you can finally rest." I slowly shook my head, letting a practiced tear slip down my weathered cheek. I told him my fragile heart couldn't handle the massive shock of signing over the entire $40 million estate at once, that it felt too much like giving up on life entirely. Instead, I pulled Gregory's newly drafted manila folder from beneath the wool blanket and slid it across the desk. I told him I had spoken with a junior officer at the bank early that morning. I explained that I had isolated $5 million into a separate, dedicated trading account. I wanted him to take over that specific account first, managing some aggressive investments for me just to put my mind at ease. I promised him that if he managed this initial portfolio well, we could comfortably discuss transferring the rest of the trust next month. Derek stared at the crisp white document on the desk. $5 million. I could practically see the frantic calculations running behind his dark eyes. It wasn't the full $40 million he desperately wanted to steal, but it was a massive, immediate injection of liquid capital. It was enough to buy him vital time, temporarily shut down the dangerous people pursuing him, and secure his immediate survival while he figured out how to quietly finish me off for the rest. Greed and pure desperation fought an intense, visible battle on his face. He picked up the document, his eyes scanning the narrow, specific terms. Gregory had drafted it brilliantly. To a drowning man, it looked like a legitimate, unbelievably lucky windfall from a confused father. Derek reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy silver pen. He didn't hesitate for another second. He signed his name on the dotted line with a quick, aggressive flourish, legally binding his wrists to the federal honeypot. I let out a heavy, exhausted sigh, resting my head against the leather chair, and told him the account was fully active, with the digital routing codes clearly printed on the second page. I casually asked if he could handle a quick transaction today, just to get things moving and give me peace of mind. Derek gave me a sharp, triumphant smile, completely unaware he was smiling directly into his own absolute ruin. He pulled out his sleek laptop right there on my desk, his fingers flying across the keys. He logged into the banking portal and within 3 minutes, he initiated a massive offshore wire transfer for the entire $5 million. He pressed execute. The quiet digital chime confirming the transaction echoed softly in the silent study. Derek closed his laptop and let out a long, shaky breath of overwhelming relief. He stood up, awkwardly patted my shoulder, told me to get some rest, and assured me everything was going to be perfect now. He walked out of the room with absolute confidence, leaving me alone in the shadows. The second the heavy wooden door clicked shut, my secure phone vibrated violently against my chest. I pulled it out. It was a heavily encrypted message from Gregory. The transfer had been successfully intercepted. The federal tripwire was instantly triggered. The FBI's cyber division had logged his exact IP address and captured the illicit offshore routing numbers directly linked to the underground syndicate. Derek had just handed federal investigators ironclad evidence on a silver platter. He was officially trapped in an inescapable cage of his own making. I stared at the glowing screen, a cold, dark sense of satisfaction settling deep into my bones. My son was going to lose his freedom, his reputation, and his entire future. But just as I started to slide the phone back into my pocket, another urgent alert flashed across the screen. It wasn't from my lawyer. It was a secure, heavily encrypted text from Leo, the terrified young technician I had left working in the back room of his repair shop. I opened the message. The text was brief, but it made my blood freeze in my veins. "Come to the shop right now," Leo wrote, his absolute terror bleeding through the digital text. "I finally decrypted the remaining hidden fragments from your wife's glasses. It's 1,000 times worse than we thought." Leo's message burned in my mind. I didn't waste a single second celebrating the trap I had just sprung on my son. Grabbing my keys, I slipped out the side door into the afternoon rain and got into my car. The drive across town was a blur of traffic lights and wet asphalt, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My stomach twisted into knots as I drove toward the commercial district. What could possibly be worse than knowing my own child had poisoned the love of my life? I pulled into the cracked parking lot of the electronics repair shop, my tires splashing through deep puddles. The neon open sign in the front window was turned off. I hurried through the pouring rain and pulled open the heavy glass door. Leo was standing nervously behind the counter, looking pale and shaken. The moment I stepped inside, the young technician rushed forward, locked the heavy deadbolt, and pulled down the metal security shutter. The narrow shop was plunged into deep shadows, lit only by the harsh blue glow of a computer monitor on his main workbench. "Mr. Caldwell, you need to sit down for this," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. He pulled over an office chair and gently guided me down. "I spent 12 hours running decryption algorithms on the damaged memory blocks inside your wife's smart glasses. I thought it was just a corrupted audio file, a glitch in the software. But the impact of her fall didn't just damage the microphone. It triggered a hidden video cache built into the device's firmware. Right before the central processor crashed, the glasses were recording visual data directly into a secure partition. I reconstructed the final 3 minutes of footage. I sat frozen in the chair, my breath catching in my throat. Martha had bought those smart glasses to help her read fine print and record recipe videos hands-free. I never imagined they would become the silent witness to her murder. "Play it," I commanded, my voice completely stripped of the fragile persona I had been putting on. Leo hesitated, his hand hovering over the mouse. He looked at me with deep sympathy before clicking the button. The large monitor flickered to life. The digital image was distorted at first, filled with static lines before snapping into terrifying crystal-clear focus. I was looking out through my wife's own eyes. The perspective shifted naturally as she moved gracefully through our sunlit kitchen. I could hear her soft, familiar humming, a gentle melody she had sung for decades, a sound that instantly shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. She was standing near the marble island, calmly pouring a glass of water. Suddenly, the camera angle jerked violently. A sharp, agonized gasp tore through the restored audio feed. Martha dropped the heavy glass tumbler, and I watched what shatter into 1,000 sparkling shards across the hardwood floor. Her breathing became shallow, rapid, and painfully labored. The camera tilted downward as she fell heavily onto the hard kitchen tiles. Her hands came into view, desperately clutching her chest. She was suffering the massive, chemically induced cardiac event the chemist had warned me about. The accumulated thallium finally triggering catastrophic cardiovascular failure. The footage shook violently as Martha tried to crawl across the cold floor, reaching weakly toward the lower cabinets. Her voice, faint and filled with absolute terror, echoed loudly through the shop's speakers. "Derek," she gasped, slurring her words in agony. "Rachel, please, help me." A pair of designer high heels walked casually into the frame, the camera tilted upward slowly. Rachel was standing directly over my helpless wife, holding a warm mug of coffee, wearing a crisp white blouse. Her expression was completely devoid of panic, grief, or human concern, a cold, terrifying mask of absolute indifference. "Rachel?" Martha gasped, her hand reaching upward, trembling violently in the digital frame. "The pills on the counter, please. My heart, I can't breathe." Rachel slowly crouched down, placing her ceramic coffee mug neatly on the granite surface. She gracefully reached out and picked up the bright orange prescription bottle containing Martha's emergency nitroglycerin. The camera captured the clear plastic bottle resting securely in Rachel's manicured hand. My poor wife let out a soft, desperate, yet deeply relieved whimper, foolishly believing that help had finally arrived. Instead, keeping silent, hollow eye contact with Martha, Rachel unscrewed the child-proof plastic cap with a smooth, practiced motion and walked calmly over to the stainless steel kitchen sink. The restored audio feed caught the distinct, horrifying sound of dozens of life-saving tablets tumbling into the metal drain, followed instantly by the loud rush of running water, flushing them away forever. Martha let out a choked, devastating sob. The camera angle flattened out against the floor as her remaining strength completely evaporated. She was utterly helpless, forced to watch her own daughter-in-law systematically destroy the medicine that could have saved her life. Then, a second set of heavy footsteps thundered into the quiet kitchen, breaking the dead silence. Derek stepped slowly into the absolute center of the digital frame. Wearing expensive running shoes, he looked down at his struggling mother with a detached, clinical curiosity, exactly like a man observing an insect squirming on hot pavement. He crouched down beside Rachel, getting uncomfortably close. His face filled the entire digital screen. He was staring directly into the hidden camera lens embedded in the thick frames of the smart glasses, completely unaware that he was being recorded in high definition. The sheer evil radiating from his dark, greedy eyes made my stomach turn with physical nausea. He reached out and gently stroked Martha's hair. It was a grotesque, sickening mockery of a loving son comforting his mother in her final moments. Sitting in that small repair shop, my fingernails dug deep into the armrests of the office chair as I was forced to witness the horrifying moment my family was destroyed. Derek brought his face just inches from the hidden microphone. His voice was a soft, deadly whisper that seemed to echo endlessly through the tiny, silent room. "I'm sorry, Mom," Derek murmured softly, his tone chillingly smooth, completely devoid of any human soul or basic mercy. "I need that trust. Dad won't suspect a thing. He's far too trusting." The video frozen for an agonizing second on his cold, hollow smile. Then I heard the terrible, wet rattle of my wife's final desperate breath. As her broken body went completely limp on the cold kitchen tiles, the camera twitched slightly, and the screen cut to pitch black. I sat in the dim, suffocating silence of the crowded electronics repair shop. The harsh blue light from the idle computer monitor cast long, hollow shadows across the scratched wooden workbench. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't fall to my knees in uncontrollable agony. The deep, suffocating grief that had anchored my soul for the past 5 painful months simply vanished into thin air. In a matter of seconds, that crushing, raw sorrow was burned away, completely consumed by a sudden, terrifying wave of pure, weaponized fury. My brain, usually a quiet warehouse of complex structural math and load-bearing calculations, shifted into a state of absolute, ice-cold clarity. Derek hadn't just watched his mother die. He actively orchestrated her murder, callously throwing away her life-saving medication while staring directly into her eyes, all to accelerate his access to the financial trust he desperately needed to pay off his illegal debts. Beside me, the young technician was shaking uncontrollably. Leo stared at the blank computer screen, his face completely drained of color, his chest heaving with shallow, terrified breaths. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers desperately fumbling across the messy desk to grab his phone. "Mr. Caldwell?" Leo stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "We have to call the police right now. We have to show them this video. They'll arrest him for murder tonight." I reached out a completely steady hand and wrapped my fingers firmly around his trembling wrist. I gently pushed his hand away from the phone, maintaining a calm but commanding grip. "No, Leo," I said quietly, my voice entirely stripped of the fragile, confused persona I had been playing hours earlier. "We are absolutely not calling the local police. If we call them now, they'll quietly arrest Derek in the comfort of his own home. He'll immediately hire a team of expensive, aggressive defense lawyers who will drag this video through endless courtroom hearings. They'll claim the file was digitally altered, or they'll push for a long, drawn-out trial while he sits comfortably on bail, spending the money he stole from my accounts. A quiet arrest is far too merciful for what they did to my wife." Leo swallowed hard, his wide eyes darting back and forth between the dark screen and my face. "Then what do you want to do?" he whispered nervously. I stood up from the office chair, feeling a sudden, powerful rush of adrenaline pumping through my veins. The lethal thallium toxins and heavy sedatives lingering in my system were instantly overwhelmed by the raw instinct to destroy the predators. "Tomorrow night is Derek's 35th birthday," I explained coldly, pacing slowly across the narrow repair shop floor. "He is throwing himself an absurdly lavish, highly exclusive dinner party in the grand ballroom of the downtown Ritz-Carlton. He invited over 300 guests. His entire network of wealthy investment banking colleagues will be there. The underground syndicate contacts he owes $15 million to will also be attending, disguised as legitimate corporate investors. And the most sickening irony of all is that he's paying for this grand celebration using my personal credit card, proudly boasting to his friends about his incredible financial success." I stopped pacing and looked directly at the young technician. "I am not going to let him hide behind closed doors," I stated firmly. "I am going to destroy him in front of every single person he desperately wants to impress. I am going to strip away his money, his freedom, and his public reputation all at the exact same time. I will leave him disgraced, ruined, and trapped with nowhere to run." Leo nodded slowly, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. He turned back to his complex computer setup. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do," he said, his voice finally steadying. "Export the fully restored, decrypted video file immediately," I instructed him, my finger pointing firmly at the glowing monitor. "Put the highest resolution version of the footage onto a master USB drive. I want the audio crystal clear. I want every single syllable of his confession perfectly audible. Make 2 secure backup copies and hide them in your shop's vault. I'm taking the master drive with me tonight." As Leo quickly began executing complex digital commands, running the video feed through rendering programs to ensure the file was completely stable, I pulled my encrypted phone from my jacket pocket. I scrolled to my secure contacts and dialed Gregory Barnes. The veteran lawyer picked up the private line instantly, his tone sharp and alert. "Thomas," Gregory said briskly, "the cyber division just confirmed the initial wire transfer hit the restricted honeypot account. Derek took the bait completely. The digital trap is locked." "That's excellent news, Gregory," I replied calmly, my voice echoing the cold mechanical precision of a steel trap snapping shut. "But the situation has escalated fundamentally. I am at an electronics shop right now. I just watched a video file recovered from Martha's smart glasses. Derek and Rachel murdered her, Gregory. They deliberately withheld her heart medication and watched her die on the kitchen floor while mocking my trust." A heavy, dead silence descended over the encrypted line. When Gregory finally spoke, his voice was a low, terrifying growl. "I will personally see to it that he rots in a federal cell for the rest of his miserable life," the lawyer swore. "Give the word, Thomas. How do you want to execute the final blow?" "I need you to contact your lead agent at the FBI right now," I commanded quietly. "Tell the cyber division we are accelerating the timeline. I don't want them raiding my house tonight. Derek is hosting a grand birthday gala tomorrow night at 8 at the Ritz-Carlton. His syndicate contacts will be in attendance. I want federal agents waiting in the wings. I want them to seal every exit of that ballroom." "Consider it done," Gregory confirmed immediately. "I'll have federal tactical units deployed in the hotel's service hallways. They will remain completely invisible until you give the ultimate signal. What are you doing with the video file?" I watched Leo carefully eject a sleek black USB drive from his computer tower. He handed the small digital weapon directly to me. I slid it safely into the inner pocket of my jacket, keeping my hand flat against the fabric. "I'm going to give my son a birthday present he will never forget," I told the experienced attorney. "Tomorrow night, when he raises his glass for a toast, I am going to hijack the screens. He will lose everything on a silver platter. Drop the hammer tonight." The following evening, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my primary bedroom, meticulously adjusting the silk lapels of my tailored charcoal tuxedo. For the past 5 months, I had been actively practicing the humbled posture of a dying, broken man. I had stooped my shoulders, dragged my feet, and let my voice tremble with artificial weakness. Tonight, that pathetic performance officially ended. I stood tall, my spine completely rigid, my shoulders squared, and my jaw set with the unyielding strength of a structural steel beam. I slid the master USB drive into my inner chest pocket, letting it rest directly against my heart. The cold, hard edge of the plastic casing served as a constant, reassuring reminder of the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. I drove alone to the Ritz-Carlton. Last night's rain had stopped, leaving the downtown streets pristine, reflecting the flickering neon lights of the financial district. With steady, deliberate movements, I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the luxury hotel's massive revolving glass doors. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in absurd luxury bought with stolen wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over hundreds of guests dressed in high-end designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. A string quartet played softly in the corner, though they were entirely drowned out by the loud, arrogant chatter of investment bankers, corporate executives, and the dangerous quiet men lurking around the perimeter representing the underground syndicate. Derek had spared no expense, casually burning through my hard-earned money to project the image of an untouchable financial titan. I stepped onto the thick carpet of the ballroom, scanning the massive crowd with absolute predatory focus. It didn't take long to find them. Derek was standing near a towering ice sculpture, holding a glass of expensive champagne, laughing loudly at a joke told by a man in a tailored silk suit with cold, dead eyes. Rachel was holding Derek's arm gracefully, wearing a diamond necklace that likely cost more than my first home. As I walked smoothly through the sea of guests, my presence commanded attention like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. I didn't drag my feet. I didn't cough. I moved with heavy, undeniable authority, like a man who maintained complete control over his domain. Rachel was the first to see me. That flawless, practiced smile completely froze on her face. Her manicured hand tightened viciously around Derek's bicep as she whispered anxiously in his ear. Derek turned his head, and his arrogant laughter died instantly in his throat. He stared at me, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated confusion. He had expected to see the feeble, confused old man who had practically begged for help in the study yesterday afternoon. He had expected a victim heavily sedated by a double dose of toxic tea, perhaps even entirely unable to attend the gala. Instead, he was looking at an imposing, formidable patriarch radiating a cold, terrifying vitality. For a fleeting second, raw panic flashed across his face. He quickly excused himself from the dangerous syndicate figures and practically rushed across the ballroom floor, intercepting me before I could mingle with the wealthy guests. "Dad," Derek gasped, his voice tight and breathless as he stepped directly into my path. "What are you doing walking around like this? You look so different today. Are you sure you should be out of bed right now?" I looked him dead in the eye, keeping my gaze completely flat, devoid of any fatherly warmth. "I feel remarkably well tonight, Derek," I stated smoothly, my voice projecting a deep, resonant strength that made him visibly flinch. A single day of proper rest and a clear mind can have such an absolutely astonishing effect on a person's overall constitution. "I wouldn't miss your 35th birthday celebration for the world." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his silk bow tie. He desperately tried to read my expression, searching frantically for any sign that I knew the truth, but my face was an impenetrable fortress of stone. Forcing a stiff, awkward smile, he decided to play along, desperately trying to secure his impending financial survival. "Well, I'm just thrilled you're feeling stronger," he muttered, leaning in close and lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He glanced back to make sure none of the high society guests or syndicate contacts were within earshot. He grabbed my elbow, attempting to gently guide me toward a quiet alcove near the velvet drapes, but I planted my feet firmly on the ground, refusing to budge. "Listen, Dad, I wanted to give you the great news," Derek whispered eagerly, his eyes shining with a sickening mix of greedy desperation and deep relief. "That dedicated trading account you set up for me yesterday, the $5 million. I successfully executed the initial trade this morning. I moved the funds into a highly secure offshore portfolio. It's going to generate massive immediate returns for the trust. You won't ever have to worry about a single financial burden again. I've taken care of everything completely." My stomach churned at his breathtaking audacity. Standing right in front of me, he was proudly bragging about committing federal wire fraud, entirely convinced he had successfully stolen my life savings to pay off the dangerous people pursuing him. He thought he was smarter than me. He thought he had secured his future, completely unaware that the FBI had instantly logged his illegal transfer, capturing his digital fingerprints and securing the necessary criminal warrants. I let out a slow, rhythmic breath as I looked at the man who shared my last name. There was absolutely nothing left to save. The biological connection between us had been cleanly severed, cut through by his unadulterated, sociopathic greed. Reaching out, I placed a firm, heavy hand directly onto his shoulder. I gripped his expensive suit jacket, my fingers applying just enough pressure to make him wince slightly from the unexpected pain. "You reap what you sow, son," I said softly. The words were quiet, but they carried the devastating, undeniable weight of a heavy hammer striking wood. Derek blinked, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What is that supposed to mean, Dad?" I offered no explanation. Smoothly releasing my grip on his shoulder, I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him standing alone near the velvet drapes. Purposefully crossing the crowded room, I navigated past crystal chandeliers, lavish buffet tables, and armed underworld enforcement figures blending into the shadows. My destination was the main audio-visual control console, cleverly hidden behind a row of tall floral arrangements. Stepping behind the thick black curtain, I pushed open the soundproof door. Leo sat motionlessly, illuminated by the harsh blue glow of a master laptop. Wearing a simple black catering uniform, he blended in completely as an invisible tech assistant. Silently, I handed him the loaded digital drive. Leo took the rectangular drive from my hand and plugged it directly into the primary input port of his central broadcasting console. A glowing green light pulsed softly, confirming that the lethal payload was primed and locked into the hotel's AV network. I gave the young technician a nod of gratitude before slipping quietly back through the velvet curtains. The staggering din of the grand ballroom instantly washed over me once more. A chaotic symphony of clinking crystal, ambient jazz, and the hollow laughter of corrupt figures. Walking with steady, deliberate strides across the crowded floor, I ignored the curious glances from corporate acquaintances who recognized me but were unsure how to approach the declining patriarch. I made my way toward the main VIP table situated directly in front of the massive stage. The table was draped in white silk and adorned with towering bonsai orchids. Taking my assigned seat, I sat bolt upright in the gilded chair, smoothing the lapels of my tuxedo with practiced, icy composure. To my left sat a row of influential banking executives, men who managed billions and controlled the local financial sector. To my right sat a group of quiet men in dark suits who didn't smile, didn't socialize, and drank expensive spirits with cold, calculating eyes. Without a doubt, these men were high-level representatives of the underground's syndicate. The very collectors Derek had desperately tried to satisfy hours earlier with my isolated honeypot account. They sat comfortably, entirely convinced their $15 million extortion had been successfully fulfilled. Looking at their cold faces, I felt a satisfying surge of anticipation, knowing that FBI tactical units were quietly deployed in the service corridors just behind the kitchen, patiently awaiting my command. Suddenly, the string quartet ceased playing. The crystal chandeliers dimmed significantly, casting a dramatic spotlight directly onto the center of the polished wooden stage. A quiet, expectant hush rippled through the spacious ballroom as 300 wealthy eagerly turned their attention forward. Derek stepped confidently into the bright circle of light, holding a glass of sparkling champagne high in his right hand. He looked radiant, the picture of youthful, undeniable success. His tailored suit fitted him impeccably, catching the light as he offered a charismatic smile to the audience. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Derek began, his voice amplified through the sound system, echoing with manufactured sincerity. Pausing to let a wave of polite applause sweep through the room, he bowed his head humbly. "It is the absolute honor of my life to see so many incredible friends and valued partners gathered here to celebrate my 35th birthday. Over the past year, together we have achieved unprecedented milestones. We navigated turbulent waters, conquered volatile markets, and built a lucrative portfolio that secures our future. But tonight isn't merely about celebrating corporate victories or aggressive market expansion." Derek took a slow, dramatic step forward, his voice dropping to a softer, more intimate tone. He skillfully manipulated the pacing of his speech, playing the crowd with the sickening expertise of a seasoned predator. "Tonight is about celebrating the core foundation that made all of this possible. It is about honoring deep, unshakable family values. It is about recognizing the immense sacrifices made by those who worked tirelessly to build the solid platform we currently stand upon." He turned his gaze directly toward my VIP table, placing his free hand flat against his chest, right over his treacherous heart. "As many of you know, this has been an exceptionally difficult, painful year for my family," Derek continued, his voice catching with artificial emotion. "5 months ago, we lost my beloved mother, Martha. She was the absolute guiding light of our lives, a warm, compassionate soul who taught me the true, lasting value of kindness, patience, and unconditional love. Her tragic passing left a void in our home that can never be filled. Every morning I think of her beautiful smile. Every evening I remember her gentle wisdom. Everything I do, every deal I close, is done strictly to honor her enduring memory." The crowd let out a collective sigh, a wave of genuine sympathy rippling through the audience. Looking sideways, I saw Rachel sitting at the adjacent table, daintily dabbing the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief, expertly wiping away a completely fake tear. My jaw clenched tight. The sheer audacity of their coordinated performance made my blood boil. Standing before hundreds of people, they openly exploited the tragic death they had engineered, wearing their fabricated grief like a designer accessory to win social sympathy and corporate trust. "And of course," Derek added, his voice trembling with a masterclass display of filial devotion as he gestured openly toward me, "I must publicly honor my father, Thomas, the visionary architect of our family trust. As many of you have seen, his health has declined sharply since losing his beloved wife. It has been heartbreaking to watch the strongest man I know face such severe physical struggles. But Dad, I want you to know right now in front of all our friends that I am here to carry the heavy load. I will proudly protect the incredible legacy you built. I will stand strong so you can rest." The grand ballroom erupted into warm applause. Wealthy guests stood up from their chairs, clapping enthusiastically, thoroughly moved by the tragic narrative of a devoted son stepping up to protect his fragile father. The syndicate figures remained seated, but raised their glasses in a silent, approving toast to the man who had just paid them millions. I remained still at the VIP table, my hands resting flat on the cool silk tablecloth. I didn't clap. I simply stared at the monster standing on stage, channeling every ounce of my cold fury into a completely blank, terrifyingly calm expression. Derek smiled warmly, soaking in the unearned adoration of the crowd. Waiting patiently for the applause to taper off, he raised his champagne glass one final time. "Before we move on to the main course, to properly close out this wonderful evening," Derek announced brightly, his voice echoing clearly through the speakers, "I prepared a very special visual tribute. Please turn your attention to the screen behind me for a curated slideshow honoring the remarkable, loving woman who made me the man I am today, my dear mother." Derek turned smoothly, gesturing directly to Bunny to the massive 20-foot projection screen hanging directly above the stage. The bright stage lights cut out instantly, plunging the room into dramatic theatrical darkness. The crowd went quiet, shifting in their seats as they eagerly awaited a touching montage of family memories. I slowly reached my hand beneath the white silk tablecloth, feeling the cold plastic casing of the communication device Leo had given me. Pressing my thumb heavily onto the single transmission button, I gave Leo the silent signal to drop the hammer. As the massive projection screen flickered to life, the darkness of the grand ballroom felt suffocating. Derek stood proudly on the polished wooden stage, a smug, expectant smile plastered on his face as he held his crystal champagne glass, ready to toast to a completely fabricated memory of his mother. 300 wealthy guests adjusted themselves comfortably in their gilded chairs, their eyes fixed on the glowing rectangle, ready for an emotional journey through a curated montage of childhood photos designed to cement Derek's public image. Instead, a harsh, jagged blast of digital static burst from the high-end speakers. A loud screech tore through the sound system, instantly silencing the polite murmurs in the room. The screen fractured into chaotic blocks of data before snapping violently into focus, displaying a raw, disorienting first-person view. It was the visual footage recovered directly from my beautiful wife's damaged smart glasses. The sheer scale of the projection made the visceral reality of the recording impossible to evade. Martha's enlarged hands appeared on the massive screen, casually reaching out to pour a glass of water in our sunlit kitchen. Her soft, familiar humming echoed through the towering concert speakers, the gentle melody lingering eerily inside the opulent room. For 5 excruciating seconds, the high society crowd could only stare at the screen in complete breathless silence. Then, the sudden medical event began. The screen jerked violently, the visual angle tilting at a sickening slope. A sharp gasp tore through the quiet ballroom, amplified 100 times over through the subwoofers. Pure, unadulterated human suffering. On screen, the heavy glass tumbler shattered into 1,000 sparkling pieces across the kitchen floor. The sound of the impact echoed like a small explosion inside the quiet hotel venue. The crowd flinched as one, a ripple of involuntary panic washing across the room. As Martha fell heavily onto the hard tiles, the camera angle plummeted. Her enlarged hands clawed desperately at her chest. Her breathing became shallow and painfully labored. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every wheeze and every desperate gasp for oxygen as the lethal thallium raged through her failing cardiovascular system. A woman near the front row let out a stifled gasp, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. The investment bankers and dangerous syndicate enforcers sat frozen in place, paralyzed with horror. "Derek," my wife gasped through the speakers, her voice laced with raw terror. "Rachel, please help me." The massive screen captured a pair of designer high heels walking casually into the frame. The camera tilted upward slowly to reveal Rachel standing directly over her struggling mother-in-law. Holding a ceramic coffee mug, her face was a cold, terrifying mask of absolute indifference. "Rachel," Martha gasped, her trembling hand reaching upward in a desperate plea for survival. "The pills on the counter, please." "My heart, I can't breathe." The entire ballroom held its breath. 300 people watched in dead silence as Rachel's larger-than-life image calmly crouched down. They watched her pick up the bright orange prescription bottle. They watched her unscrew the child-proof cap with smooth, chilling precision. A collective shudder ran through the audience as Rachel walked straight over to the kitchen sink. The sound system boomed with the terrible noise of dozens of life-saving tablets tumbling down the metal drain, followed immediately by the rush of running water, flushing away her only chance of survival forever. A low, sickening murmur began to build rapidly toward the back of the room. Pure, visceral revulsion radiated through the gathered guests, but the digital execution was far from over. Another set of heavy footsteps confidently entered the audio feed. Derek walked slowly into the absolute center of the 20-foot screen. He crouched beside Rachel, getting uncomfortably close to his dying mother. His face was magnified to monstrous proportions, dominating the entire backdrop of the stage. The crowd looked straight into the eyes of the man who had just been hosting them. The sheer evil radiating from his digitized gaze made the lavish ballroom feel colder than a morgue. He gently stroked Martha's hair, a grotesque mockery of affection that made several guests turn their faces away in disgust. He brought his face just inches from the hidden microphone built into his mother's glasses. "I'm sorry, Mom," Derek whispered. The digital audio was flawless, the smooth, deadly words booming through the room, vibrating heavily against the walls. "I need that trust. Dad won't suspect a thing. He's far too trusting." The entire ballroom seemed to plummet collectively into a dark, bottomless abyss. The massive screen froze on his cold, hollow smile for one final, agonizing second. Then, the speakers broadcast the terrible, wet rattle of my wife's final desperate breath. As her broken body went completely limp on the cold tiles, the camera twitched slightly and the screen cut to pitch black. A deafening silence choked the room for 3 long seconds. The sheer scale of the betrayal left every single person in attendance completely paralyzed. Then the crystal chandeliers flashed back on, flooding the entire ballroom in a blinding, unforgiving light. The dazzling illumination shattered the horrific spell. The fragile crystal champagne glass finally slipped from Derek's paralyzed fingers, smashing onto the polished wooden stage and shattering into 100 sparkling pieces. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. That sound broke the dam. Rachel let out a piercing, hysterical scream of pure panic, stumbling backward off the stage with her hands clutched around her head in absolute terror. The distinguished crowd erupted into a massive, chaotic uproar. Wealthy executives shouted in absolute outrage, the sickening whispers instantly morphing into loud, aggressive accusations. The quiet, dangerous men from the syndicate slowly rose from their table, their icy gazes locking onto Derek with lethal intent. They realized in an instant that their $15 million debtor wasn't a wealth investment genius, but a pathetic, exposed murderer about to be consumed by the federal justice system. Derek stood frozen in the absolute center of the stage, his pristine, tailored world evaporating into dust around him. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving behind a terrible, nauseating shade of pale gray. His jaw worked silently, frantically trying to construct a plausible lie, but there was nowhere left to hide. The digital evidence was undeniable, devastating, and entirely public. Slowly and painfully, his terrified eyes scanned the chaotic sea of angry faces, desperately searching for an anchor in the storm. His gaze finally swept across the front row, locking dead onto mine. I sat perfectly still at the main VIP table. I didn't scream, I didn't flinch, I didn't look away. I maintained a posture of absolute structural rigidity, my face an icy mask of pure, weaponized fury. As Derek stared into my eyes, feeling the rage radiating from my calm demeanor, the catastrophic truth finally crashed through his panicked mind. He saw the complete disappearance of the feeble, confused old man he had systematically manipulated for months. He saw the cold, calculating engineer who had meticulously disassembled his entire life. His trembling lips lost all color as he realized I had orchestrated this devastating public execution in front of all his high society peers. He was completely ruined, trapped inside a nightmare of his own making. For 5 long, painful months, I had played the perfect victim, slowly building my invisible trap piece by piece. Now the predator was caught in the crushing steel jaws of my justice, and I was going to watch him lose everything he desperately loved. The FBI tactical units waiting silently in the hidden service corridors were about to make their final entry. The heavy weight of silence in the ballroom finally broke, shattering into chaotic pieces. Derek pulled his terrified gaze away from my unyielding glare, his chest heaving with ragged breaths as his constructed reality dissolved into a devastating nightmare. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping clumsily on the polished mahogany stage. He knocked over the wooden podium, sending the metal microphone crashing to the floor with a deafening screech of digital feedback that made the guests cover their ears. "This is a deepfake," Derek screamed, his voice cracking with the hysteria of pure panic. His hands waved wildly, pointing frantically at the blank projection screen above. "This is a fabricated lie. My father suffers from severe dementia. He's clinically insane. He hired technicians to construct this terrible video to ruin my professional reputation. Don't believe a single second of that footage. It's all a desperate delusion." But his frantic denials fell on a terrifyingly unresponsive room. Wealthy investment bankers, corporate executives, and dangerous figures from the underworld, figuratives, stared back without a single reassuring nod. They looked at him with deep revulsion and predatory calculation. They had heard the chilling sound of the pills going down the drain. They had heard his cold confession captured perfectly through the hidden microphone. They knew with absolute certainty that they were looking at a man who had ended his own mother's life for financial gain. Realizing he had lost the room entirely hit Derek like a physical blow. The color drained completely from his sweat-slicked face. Turning around, his frantic eyes darted across the lavish ballroom, desperately calculating an escape route. The main doors were blocked by a dense wall of angry guests. His only remaining option was the set of double doors leading into the catering kitchen at the far end of the venue. Derek leaped off the raised wooden stage, completely abandoning his sophisticated facade. He hit the carpet hard and immediately began sprinting toward the back of the room in pure desperation. Rachel let out another sharp scream of pure terror. Gathering the heavy layers of her shimmering designer gown, the diamond necklace bouncing violently against her chest, she scrambled to chase after her husband. She stumbled blindly in her high stilettos, her perfectly styled hair falling in sweaty strands across her frantic face. "Wait!" Rachel sobbed hysterically, her voice ringing out sharply above the chaotic din of the massive crowd. "Derek, don't leave me here. Wait for me." 300 wealthy guests practically tripped over themselves to clear a path, recoiling violently from the fleeing couple as if they were carrying a contagious disease. No one reached out a hand to help. No one offered a comforting word. They parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, empty corridor of absolute disgrace leading straight to the kitchen service doors. I watched their desperate escape with a cold, structural calm. Pushing my chair back from the VIP table, I stood up. My posture was completely rigid, my spine aligned, radiating an undeniable, heavy authority. Stepping smoothly across the floor, my rhythmic footsteps cut clearly through the panicked crowd. I walked up to the fallen podium, bent down with fluid precision, and picked up the metal microphone. Tapping the heavy mesh head twice, the sharp thuds boomed loudly through the towering speakers, capturing the undivided attention of every person in the room. The chaotic shouting and angry murmurs died down, replaced by a tense silence heavier than lead. Looking out over the vast sea of faces, I finally spoke. My voice was deep, steady, and completely devoid of the weak, artificial frailty I had projected over the last 5 months. "What you just witnessed on that screen was no digital fabrication," I announced smoothly, the truth echoing with absolute clarity. That was the brutal reality of my beautiful wife's final moments on this earth. But their murderous ambition didn't end with her passing. For 5 months, Derek and Rachel have been systematically poisoning me in my own home, serving me herbal tea laced with heavy sedatives every single day to mimic the symptoms of advanced cognitive decline. Reaching into the inner chest pocket of my charcoal tuxedo, I pulled out the thick toxicology report from the analytical laboratory. I held the devastating medical document high in the air for the entire ballroom to see. "This is a comprehensive toxicology screen performed by an independent laboratory just this afternoon," I declared coldly, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a sharpened steel blade. "It proves conclusively that the tea they prepared for me contained high, lethal concentrations of a heavy metal compound known as thallium, a tasteless, odorless poison designed to slowly destroy the central nervous system and trigger a sudden, catastrophic cardiac arrest. They ended Martha's life to accelerate the execution of a massive legal trust, and they were actively preparing to finish me off this week to pay off $15 million in offshore gambling debts." A collective gasp rippled violently through the stunned audience. The dangerous figures from the syndicate exchanged dark, lethal glances, their hands subtly slipping beneath their tailored suit jackets. Derek was just feet away from reaching the heavy double doors of the kitchen, his hand reaching out to shove the brass push plate, his desperate mind focused entirely on securing his immediate escape into the labyrinth of service corridors. Pushing open the right-hand door with the last of his strength, he threw his bossy weight forward toward what he thought was safety in the shadows. The heavy wooden door swung inward, but Derek failed to take a single step forward. He collided violently with a solid wall of black tactical armor. A dozen high-powered flashlight beams cut through the dim light, illuminating his sweat-slicked, terror-stricken face. An entire FBI tactical squad, fully geared in dark Kevlar vests clearly printed with bright yellow lettering, completely blocked the kitchen entrance. Moving with silent precision, they advanced into the grand ballroom, forming an impenetrable, heavily armed roadblock at the only viable exit. Rachel slammed hard into Derek's back, letting out a breathless scream. The formidable federal agents systematically raised their weapons, their faces concealed behind dark tactical helmets and ballistic visors. From the absolute center of the federal formation, a familiar, well-dressed figure stepped into the warm light of the crystal chandeliers. Gregory Barnes, my relentless estate attorney, casually adjusted the lapels of his pristine black suit, his predatory eyes locking directly onto my trembling son. In his right hand, Gregory held an official federal arrest warrant. I watched the scene from the front of the stage, my face a flawless mask of cold, calculated victory. Lowering the metal microphone, I offered my son a dark, utterly unforgiving smile. Our carefully constructed trap had finally snapped shut with bone-crushing force. There was absolutely nowhere left to run. The heavy silence of the grand ballroom shattered into absolute chaos the moment the federal agents crossed the threshold. The heavily armed tactical squad moved with frightening discipline and efficiency. They didn't shout loud orders at the panicked guests or brandish their weapons indiscriminately. Instead, maintaining a tight, focused formation, they moved directly toward the stage, their heavy boots thundering in perfect unison against the polished wooden floor. The high society crowd scrambled frantically out of their path, knocking over crystal champagne glasses and lavish floral arrangements in their desperation to clear the way for the advancing federal wave. Derek stood at the edge of the stage, completely paralyzed. His initial instinct to run had evaporated, replaced entirely by the crushing, suffocating weight of his inescapable reality. He watched the dark uniforms close in, his eyes wide and unblinking, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. Two burly federal agents reached the front of the stage and leaped onto the wooden steps with impressive speed. Before my son could even register their approach, they grabbed the shoulders of his tailored tuxedo and slammed him face down onto the nearest silk-draped banquet table. The impact swept expensive silverware and fine china clattering to the floor. Derek let out a sharp, breathless gasp as the weight of the agents pinned him firmly against the white tablecloth. His arms were violently twisted behind his back, and the crisp, cold, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed sharply over the chaotic murmurs of the stunned audience. Derek Caldwell, the lead agent, announced, his deep, booming voice easily dominating the spacious room. "You are officially under arrest by order of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are being formally charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and federal wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The terrifying weight of those charges swept over the lavish ballroom like an icy wave. First-degree murder. The whispered words rippled rapidly through the crowd of wealthy investment bankers and corporate executives. They stared at the man they had been enthusiastically celebrating moments ago, their expressions twisting from initial confusion into deep, visceral revulsion. The flawless mask Derek had spent years cultivating was being violently dismantled piece by piece right in front of his entire professional network. Suddenly, a sharp, hysterical scream tore through the heavy atmosphere. "You know how she is, Dad." Rachel had managed to scramble away from the tactical team blocking the kitchen doors, but her escape was short-lived. Two female federal agents intercepted her, grabbing her bare arms and spinning her around. Rachel fought wildly against them, her layered designer gown tangling around her legs as she struggled against their iron grip. "I didn't do anything!" Rachel screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. Her perfectly styled hair fell in messy, sweat-soaked strands across her face, completely ruining her image of aristocratic perfection. She twisted her neck frantically, locking her terrified eyes on Derek, who was still pinned against the banquet table. "It was all his idea," she wailed, pointing a trembling finger straight at her husband. "He forced me to do it. He told me he'd leave me with nothing if I didn't help him handle the medication. He's a monster. He's a gambler. You have to believe me. I'm the victim here." Her desperate, pathetic betrayal was instantaneous and absolute. The moment her own freedom was directly threatened, she eagerly threw the man she claimed to love straight to the wolves. Derek turned his head slightly against the rumpled silk tablecloth, looking at his screaming wife with an expression of pure, shattered disbelief. The federal agents ignored her hysterical performance entirely. They efficiently pinned her arms behind her back, snapping a matching pair of steel handcuffs around her wrists. She continued to sob loudly, her fake tears replaced entirely by the ugly crying of a trapped criminal, realizing her stolen luxury life had come to a permanent end. As the agents secured the prisoners, Gregory Barnes stepped calmly onto the wooden stage. My veteran attorney moved with the slow, measured grace of a seasoned predator circling captured prey. Picking up the discarded metal microphone from the floor, he dusted off the mesh head and turned to face the captivated, horrified audience. Gregory's sharp gaze swept slowly across the room, deliberately lingering on the dark, quiet table occupied by the figures representing the underground syndicate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory announced, his deep voice projecting a cold, unwavering authority, "I apologize for the sudden disruption to tonight's festivities. However, it is imperative to clarify the exact nature of the events unfolding before you. The $5 million wire transfer executed by Mr. Derek Caldwell earlier today was not a brilliant corporate investment. It was a carefully orchestrated, heavily monitored federal sting operation." Gregory paused, letting the devastating truth sink in fully. The specific account Mr. Caldwell accessed was a restricted federal honeypot, Gregory continued, his words hitting like physical blows. By deliberately routing those funds to unverified offshore entities in a desperate attempt to cover his massive illegal gambling debts, he provided federal investigators with the exact digital blueprint of his illicit financial network. As we speak, every single offshore account associated with that fraudulent transfer has been completely frozen and seized by international authorities. I watched the syndicate men at the adjacent table closely. Their cold, calculating eyes widened slightly in sudden, terrible realization. Their postures shifted instantly from relaxed arrogance to tense, dangerous panic. They realized that Derek had not only failed to pay them their $15 million, but he had actively guided a massive federal task force straight to their hidden financial infrastructure. They had lost their money, and their entire covert operation was now irrevocably exposed. Their eyes locked onto Derek, radiating a deadly promise of future violence. Lowering the microphone, Gregory signaled for the tactical team to proceed. The lead agents hauled Derek up roughly, grabbing the back of his collar. They began marching him across the grand ballroom, forcing him to walk a long, humiliating path toward the main entrance. The crowd parted silently, refusing to make eye contact with the disgraced murderer. As they dragged Derek past my VIP table, his legs suddenly gave out. The overwhelming terror of his situation completely broke his spirit. He dropped heavily to his knees on the thick carpet, dragging the federal agents down slightly with his weight. Looking up at me, his face was streaked with real, terrified tears. The arrogant investment banker was gone, replaced entirely by a weeping coward. He realized his entire life was officially and permanently destroyed. He opened his trembling mouth, begging me for a mercy he had never shown Martha. "Dad, please. The people from the syndicate will end me in prison. You have to save me. I'm your son." I looked down at the pathetic man kneeling on the thick carpet. He was trembling violently, his tailored tuxedo ruined by the reality of his arrest. The tears streaming down his cheeks weren't born of remorse for the mother he had killed, nor were they out of guilt for the pain he had inflicted on this family. They were the terrified tears of a cornered narcissist, realizing he was nothing more than prey. He begged me to save him, his voice cracking desperately as he invoked the sacred family bond he had so casually destroyed 5 months ago. Standing over him, I felt a deep emptiness. There was no overwhelming surge of triumphant joy in my chest, nor was there an explosion of rage. I didn't raise my voice to scream at him. I didn't clench my fists to strike him. He wasn't worth my anger. The toxic fury that had sustained me through 5 months of playing the frail victim had completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold resolve. I saw him clearly for what he was, a hollow shell driven entirely by greed. The federal agents held him firmly in place. Gregory stood by silently, watching the culmination of our meticulous plan. The entire ballroom held its breath, expecting a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I bent my knees, lowering my rigid frame until my face was just inches from Derek's panicked features. He leaned forward eagerly, a pathetic flicker of false hope shining in his eyes, foolishly believing that a father's unconditional love would somehow override the cold facts of deliberate murder. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for any lingering trace of the little boy I had once raised. There was absolutely nothing left, only emptiness, staring back at me. I let out a slow, rhythmic breath, feeling the absolute finality of the moment. "I'm just a confused old man who doesn't know anything, Derek," I whispered softly, making sure the chilling words reached only his ears. I don't know who you are." The desperate hope vanished from his pale face in an instant, replaced by incomprehensible horror. His jaw dropped, but no sound came out. He finally understood the absolute perfection of the trap. I had turned his own arrogant words back against him, the exact words he had spoken in his office when he thought I was too weak and heavily sedated to notice his lethal ambition. Straightening up completely, I cut off eye contact, turned my back, and walked away from the man who used to share my last name. "No!" Derek screamed suddenly, the sound tearing from his throat with animal desperation. "Dad, please don't walk away. You can't just leave me. They'll destroy me." I ignored his frantic cries entirely. Stepping toward the main exit of the ballroom, my footsteps were heavy and rhythmic, completely undisturbed by the chaos unfolding right behind me. As I approached, the massive crowd of wealthy guests, corporate executives, and stunned socialites parted silently, their faces reflecting a mix of deep shock and quiet respect. No one dared to say a word. The dangerous figures from the syndicate remained frozen at their table, their cold eyes watching me leave, fully aware of the sheer scale of the federal trap that had just brought down their illicit empire. Pushing through the revolving glass doors of the luxury hotel, I stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the dark city streets clean and quiet. The bright neon lights of the financial district reflected vividly in the puddles along the sidewalk. For the first time of 5 painful months, I took a deep, unburdened breath. I didn't stoop my shoulders. I didn't drag my feet. I stood tall, the oppressive weight of my artificial frailty permanently lifted from my weary bones. Behind me, the muffled sirens of approaching police cruisers began to echo in the distance, the fitting final soundtrack to the ultimate destruction of Derek's stolen world. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and absolute. Federal prosecutors offered no lenient plea bargains or quiet settlements. The evidence we meticulously gathered was so overwhelming and undeniable that any form of judicial mercy was out of the question. The digital confession recorded by Martha's smart glasses, combined with the comprehensive toxicology reports from the toxic tea and the documented financial fraud, built an ironclad case. Derek and Rachel had counted on leveraging my massive family trust to hire the most aggressive, expensive defense attorneys in the country, hoping to overwhelm the legal system with endless litigation. However, because Gregory and I had frozen and seized every single one of their financial assets hours before the gala, they were left entirely penniless. They were stripped clean of the ill-gotten gains they had tried to secure through cold-blooded murder. Without my money to fund a sophisticated defense, their high-priced legal representation evaporated overnight. Abandoned completely by their wealthy social circle, they were instantly treated as toxic pariahs by the very people who had been toasting their success just days earlier. The trial was brief, clinical, and devastating. The prosecution then presented the horrific video from Martha's final moments directly to the jury. The absolute cruelty of Rachel pouring the life-saving medication down the kitchen sink, paired with Derek whispering his murderous intent, sealed their fate in a matter of hours. The jury deliberated for less than an afternoon. When the final verdicts were read, there were no dramatic emotional outbursts in the courtroom, only the heavy, satisfying thud of the judge's wooden gavel. Derek and Rachel were both sentenced to serve consecutive life terms in a maximum security federal prison, with absolutely no possibility of parole. They will spend the rest of their miserable lives inside cold concrete cells, permanently stripped of their designer clothes, stolen luxury, and arrogant freedom. The syndicate fared no better. The $5 million wire transfer Derek executed to my monitored honeypot account provided the FBI with the exact digital key needed to unlock the entire criminal network. Using the meticulously logged transaction data, tactical teams systematically tracked, froze, and seized dozens of hidden offshore accounts. The dangerous figures who had confidently attended the gala to collect their extortion payments were aggressively hunted down and arrested within weeks. Their violent empire was thoroughly dismantled, and its illegal assets were permanently confiscated by the government, effectively eliminating the threat they posed. Now, sitting alone in the quiet warmth of my study, I look at the framed photograph of Martha resting on my mahogany desk. The heavy, suffocating darkness that hovered over my life for the past year has finally begun to fade, replaced by a serene, lasting peace. The house is quiet, but it no longer feels empty. I honored her memory in the only way that truly mattered. I protected the legacy we built together and ensured the monsters who took her faced the absolute highest punishment for their crimes. I survived the darkest storm imaginable, emerging stronger and completely unburdened by the shadows of the past. The trap has snapped shut, the chessboard is clear, and a cold, absolute justice has finally been served. 6 months flew by with the swift, relentless momentum of a world finally correcting its axis. The oppressive winter surrendered completely to a bright, vibrant spring, reflecting the profound transformation within my own life. I stand quietly in the brilliant morning sunlight, looking up at the sleek, towering glass facade of the newly expanded Chicago Medical Center. The crisp, cool wind gently stirs the lapels of my dark suit, but I feel no chill at all, only a deep, radiating warmth anchoring my soul to the ground. Today is the culmination of everything I fought to protect. A small crowd of respectful hospital administrators, top cardiovascular surgeons, and dedicated medical staff gather around a polished marble podium near the main entrance. A wide crimson ribbon stretches across the gleaming automatic doors. Standing right beside me to my right is Gregory, my steadfast attorney, holding a leather folder containing the final trust documents. We successfully liquidated the massive $40 million family fund, permanently removing it from the greedy, blood-stained hands of my disgraced son. Every single cent of that vast fortune was meticulously redirected into this grand charitable endeavor. The hospital president steps forward, adjusting the microphone. He speaks passionately about the countless lives this state-of-the-art facility will save, detailing the fully operational advanced operating rooms and breakthrough research laboratories. He speaks of the unparalleled generosity that made this ambitious vision a tangible reality. But as applause ripples respectfully through the crowd, my focus isn't on the praise. My eyes are locked onto the heavy bronze plaque firmly mounted to the polished granite wall beside the entrance. The Martha Caldwell Cardiology Wing. The gold lettering shines flawlessly in the morning light. Reaching out, I gently trace the engraved outline of my beautiful wife's name. A deep, overwhelming sense of fulfillment washes over my entire being. Martha suffered terribly in her final moments, betrayed by the very boy she carried and loved deeply. Her failing heart was callously ignored for the sake of a terrible inheritance. Now, her immortal name will forever be associated with healing, critical medical intervention, and the saving of human lives. I smile softly, feeling a genuine expression of peace I haven't felt in over a year. The legacy we built together is finally safe, far beyond the reach of greedy, corrupt hands. Taking the golden scissors offered by the president, I cut cleanly through the crimson ribbon. The crowd erupts into genuine, heartfelt applause. The wing is officially open for service. The dark shadow of Derek's terrible crimes has been permanently eclipsed by this monument of enduring light. Following a brief reception, I decline Gregory's offer of a ride, choosing instead to walk the 2 miles back to my estate. The physical exertion feels incredible. My legs, which I had forced into a painful shuffle for 5 agonizing months, now take long, powerful, confident strides. My spine remains completely straight. My breathing is deep and rhythmic, inhaling the clean, unpolluted city air. The physical frailty I painstakingly faked is entirely gone, replaced by a robust, undeniable vitality that defies my age. Turning onto my quiet, tree-lined street, the familiar outline of my stone house comes into view. As I unlock the heavy oak front door and step into the grand foyer, the immediate silence of the empty house welcomes me. But this is no longer the suffocating, tense silence of a home harboring dangerous predators. It is a clean, honest, and deeply comforting quiet. The toxic presence of Derek and Rachel has been completely eradicated from these walls, cleansed by the absolute finality of their federal convictions. I walk slowly through the spacious living room, letting my fingertips slide across the polished mahogany furniture. I move toward the sunlit corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The terrible, drooping Boston fern, which had served as a secret grave for my daily doses of toxic tea, is completely gone. Months ago, I personally bagged the contaminated soil and threw the heavy ceramic pot into a municipal dumpster. In its place sits a vibrant, thriving white orchid, its delicate petals blooming beautifully in the natural light. It was Martha's favorite flower, a living testament to her eternal presence in this home. I continue into the kitchen, the very room where Derek callously watched his mother draw her last breath. The terrible echoes of that day have been systematically replaced by the quiet, mundane rhythms of a restored life. I fill a copper kettle with fresh, filtered water and place it on the gas stove. Lighting the burner, I watch the bright blue flame leap to life. Opening the wooden pantry, I pull out a simple, unbranded box of chamomile tea. I don't need to inspect the contents. I don't need to covertly dump the liquid into the roots of a dying houseplant. The kettle's sharp whistle breaks the serene silence. Pouring the boiling water into a porcelain mug, I watch the golden liquid steep perfectly. I pick up the warm mug and take a long, slow sip. The flavor is pure, soothing, and completely safe. Carrying my tea into the primary study, I sit down in my heavy leather armchair. Looking out the window at the manicured back lawn, I feel the sharp, unclouded clarity of my own mind. My cognitive function is razor sharp. My body is healthy and strong, entirely free of the heavy metal poison that nearly took my life. I looked straight into the terrifying abyss of family betrayal, and I emerged completely victorious. The chessboard wasn't just cleared, it was rebuilt entirely on my uncompromised terms. Closing my eyes, I let the warm sunlight pour over my face. I can almost feel Martha's gentle hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. Her spirit, long restless from the cruel injustice of her passing, is finally at peace. The monsters are locked away in concrete cages, while her beautiful name is etched permanently in bronze, saving lives every single day. The war is officially over, and the enduring silence of my home is the ultimate sound of victory.